In 1979, a program intended to turn biology into a strategic weapon lost control of anthrax at Sverdlovsk. At least 64 people died. Yet the Soviet Union did not publicly acknowledge the true nature of the leak until Boris Yeltsin admitted it in the 1990s. The broad outline is documented. A lethal release occurred inside a covert offensive biological weapon system, and the truth emerged only years later. But the supplied evidence does not establish every mechanical step that caused the escape. That boundary matters, because Sverdlovsk is not simply a story about a failed component. It is about what happens when dangerous research, military ambition, and secrecy occupy the same system. What was the Soviet program trying to achieve? It was not a small laboratory project or a purely defensive investigation. The Soviet Union operated what the source describes as the largest and most sophisticated known biological weapons program in the world. It began in the 1920s and lasted until at least September 1992. Under the civilian cover organization Biopreparat, between 40 and 50 facilities conducted military-purpose biological research across the Soviet Union. The program studied several distinct military roles. Strategic agents were intended for use against cities. Operational agents were considered for disrupting military reinforcements and services behind a battlefield. A separate anti-agriculture program, called Ekologia, targeted crops and livestock. The causative agents of plague, smallpox, and Q fever were weaponized and stockpiled, while other pathogens and toxins were investigated for different roles. Anthrax occupied both strategic and operational categories and was also stockpiled. At a safe, high level, the underlying concept was brutally simple. A pathogen that causes disease naturally could be developed into a military agent, produced within specialized facilities, held for potential use, and integrated into strategic planning. That required a chain of controls separating dangerous biological material from workers, surrounding communities, and the wider environment. The exact controls and production procedures at Sverdlovsk are not described in the supplied evidence, and recreating them would be neither responsible nor necessary. The essential point is that containment was not incidental. It was the boundary between a weapons program and an uncontrolled biological release. Confidence appears to have grown through scale. The overall system expanded to dozens of secret sites and employed as many as 65,000 people. Its stated capacities were immense. In later decades, some agents were altered to resist environmental conditions and antibiotics. Scale, however, is not the same as safety. A large institution can accumulate expertise while also multiplying the number of facilities, processes, transfers, and decisions through which failure may occur. The evidence does not document a sequence of successful Sverdlovsk tests that justified confidence, so none should be invented. What it does show is an enormous, long-lived program whose leaders treated biological weapons as a serious component of national military power. That distinction changes how the warning signs should be understood. The source pack supplies no verified account of an ignored alarm, a specific malfunction, a worker's warning, or a known defect immediately before the 1979 leak. It would be dramatic to construct such a sequence, but it would not be evidence. The documented constraint was broader and more structural. Highly dangerous biological agents were being handled inside a covert military network. When information is compartmentalized by design, outsiders cannot independently test whether internal safety claims are accurate. Secrecy does not prove that a particular warning was ignored. It does mean that failures can be harder to detect, challenge, and investigate openly. Then came the turning point. In 1979, anthrax leaked at Sverdlovsk. The incident resulted in at least 64 deaths. Those are the secure facts available here. The supplied evidence does not identify the exact failed device, the detailed release pathway, the duration of the event, or the full sequence of local decisions. It therefore supports a proximate conclusion, but not a complete engineering reconstruction. Anthrax escaped from the weapon system, exposure followed, and people died. The unexpected consequence was not that anthrax could be lethal. The entire military value assigned to it depended on that fact. The contradiction was that an agent being developed as a controlled instrument of state power became an uncontrolled hazard. The same properties sought for military usefulness magnified the stakes of containment failure. Once the biological material crossed its intended boundary, the program's intended distinction between weapon, workplace, and surrounding society collapsed. The cascade continued beyond the immediate deaths. Because the larger program was covert, the accident existed inside a system already organized to conceal its offensive purpose. The source does not provide the precise public explanation offered at the time, nor does it document individual acts of destruction, falsification, or coercion. Those claims must remain outside this account. What can be said is narrower but still consequential. The true nature of the Sverdlovsk leak was admitted by Boris Yeltsin only in the 1990s. The title's central promise is therefore supported at the institutional level. A covert program suffered a lethal accident, and official acknowledgment of what it really was came years afterward. That delay damaged more than historical clarity. In any hazardous field, understanding an accident depends on access to records, equipment, personnel, and competing technical explanations. A closed military program restricts that scrutiny. It also makes uncertainty persistent. Even after an admission, investigators and the public may know that a release occurred without possessing enough verified evidence to assign each mechanical and managerial step. Sverdlovsk demonstrates how secrecy can become part of the failure chain, not necessarily as the physical cause of the initial leak, but as a barrier to timely accountability and reliable reconstruction. The investigation must therefore separate several layers. The Proximate event was the anthrax leak. The technical root cause, the precise failure that allowed the release, is not established in the supplied evidence. Any confident claim about a specific component, maintenance action, or operating mistake would go beyond the record provided here. The organizational cause is clearer at the systemic level. The accident occurred within an immense, covert, military-purpose biological program distributed across dozens of facilities. Civilian cover obscured military activity. Strategic planning treated lethal pathogens as assets to be developed and stockpiled. None of those facts alone identifies the broken barrier at Sverdlovsk, but together, they describe the institution that created and managed the hazard. The ethical failure is clearer still. The program was not merely studying disease to prevent suffering. It pursued strategic, operational, and agricultural biological weapons. Strategic concepts included attacks on major cities with lethal pathogens, while other work targeted military support systems, crops, and livestock. Sverdlovsk exposed the danger imposed when such work escapes its intended boundaries. The deaths were not an abstract modeling error. They were the consequence of a real release from a system built around organisms and toxins selected for their capacity to harm. Retrospective interpretation requires caution. Defectors including Vladimir Pasechnik and Ken Alibek later described the program as massive and continuing. Yeltsin acknowledged both the offensive program and the true nature of Sverdlovsk. But the broader claim that related activity may have continued after the Soviet period remains uncertain in the supplied source. Possibility is not proof. The record supports the existence, size, duration, and lethal accident of the Soviet system. It does not settle the fate of every former agent, site, or capability. What changed was official policy, at least on paper. In 1992, Russia signed a trilateral agreement with the United States and the United Kingdom, promising to end biological weapons programs and convert facilities to peaceful purposes. That agreement represented a formal reversal. Infrastructure created for offensive military biology was supposed to be dismantled or redirected. Yet the source also states that compliance and the fate of former Soviet biological agents and facilities remains mostly undocumented. The reform, therefore, cannot be described as a fully verified closure. The admission and agreement changed the official position, but they did not erase the evidentiary gaps created by decades of secrecy. Sverdlovsk's decisive force was not an exotic scientific surprise. Anthrax was being pursued because its danger was already understood. The failure came when a system designed to control that danger allowed it to escape, and when the covert structure surrounding the program delayed acknowledgment of what had happened. Technical uncertainty remains, but the central causal distinction is firm. The leak caused the immediate disaster. The scale, military purpose, and secrecy of the institution shaped both the risk and the long aftermath. Science itself does not require that knowledge be turned into a weapon, nor does one accident condemn biological research as a whole. The lesson is more precise. Powerful technical capability needs containment, independent scrutiny, truthful reporting, and institutions willing to expose failure rather than bury it. When those safeguards are subordinated to secrecy and strategic ambition, uncertainty does not disappear. It is transferred to everyone outside the protected walls, and sometimes so is the hazard. This content is for educational purposes only. Do not attempt to recreate any described experiment or procedure.